Good evening. Welcome to the Burnsville Economic Development Commission meeting on September 13th of 2017. First order of business is adoption of the agenda for September 13th, 2017.
I would like to make a motion to adopt the agenda for tonight's meeting.
Chris, thank you.
I'll second.
Sandra, thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Great. Adoption of the minutes, July 12th, 2017.
I'll make a motion to adopt the minutes of July 12th, 2017.
Great. And a second?
I'll second.
Great, thank you. Sandra? Any further discussion? All in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Great. Item number 3 on the agenda, review of the 2040 Comprehensive Plan, Economic Development and Redevelopment Plan chapter.
Mr. Chair, our consultant, Tom Layton, will be handling this. And Tom, if you want to do it from the podium there.
Thanks for inviting us tonight. I'm happy to be here with Mark Kokler with Hoisington Kokler Group. This has been a hardworking committee working on this economic development chapter over a period of some time here. We've met 3 times in work sessions, had a good conversation about the business district near Cliff Road, part of which has been called the Lark Industrial Park. We had in February another meeting where we talked about the MRQ area and Heart of the City Phase 2, as well as Burnsville Center Mall. In each area we talked about the market context. We looked at potential development and growth of these areas over time and talked about implementation strategies that could be employed to advance the growth and development of these areas. And the third time we met was in May, and in that meeting we talked about general economic development goals and strategies that can advance the economic development well-being of the city. So with that input and our own research, those are the things that got folded into the economic development chapter, economic competitiveness chapter, I guess it's titled, of the city's comprehensive plan. So that was drafted up. I'm sure you've read it, and you'll have noted that it doesn't include every detail that we discussed and presented. We had to boil that down to an amount that captured the highlights for that chapter. That chapter has been reviewed by the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee, and we got some good quality input from them about the chapter. The most important piece of input or significant piece of input we got from them was that they wanted to see some of our findings and recommendations related to the Burnsville Center Mall highlighted in that chapter. So we actually went back and built that into its own section of the plan that's sort of on par to Heart of the City, Minnesota River Quadrant, etc. So that's the version that was sent out to you. You'll notice it includes a focus on those geographical areas. It includes some of the background, sort of economic scan of the city. There's a new section in the chapter that's called economic competitiveness. It's sort of a general 30,000-foot view of the strengths and weaknesses of the city of Burnsville from an economic competitiveness perspective. So interested if you have any feedback on that. The goals and strategies we worked with quite a bit. That was folded into a revision of the goals and strategies from the last comprehensive plan, and interested if you have any comments on how that came out. We don't have a particular structure for getting your feedback on this now. We're open to any comments you have, any questions. Are there things that you felt got left out of the chapter that really are important? Are there things in the chapter as you've reviewed it that you feel like maybe are not on target? Those are all things we're interested in, as well as any questions you might have. So I guess I'd like to open the floor for your feedback.
Brady?
One of the questions I have as I go through this, and I looked at kind of the summary that we were provided at the front end, is Minnesota River Quadrant continues to get a lot of real estate in the economic development plan and the comp plan. And how do we feel it works as far as our devotion to that area versus, in reading this, it seems as though 2038 is maybe the time frame when we could start any projects of substance in the area.
Yeah, I think it's great that you're aware of that, and mindful of that. We've tried to approach it as a long-term vision. So we've tried to not be real prescriptive about what should happen there. And the implementation strategies, you might have noticed, are also pretty general, and reflect the fact that that is an area that can emerge over a long period of time. But I want to also add that it's a really unique asset for Burnsville. When that does become available for redevelopment, it's going to be, I think, in the metropolitan area, a unique opportunity area, the kind that doesn't come along very often. So I think it's appropriate for the city of Burnsville to maintain that as a long-term vision, as something that you recognize can play a really important role, maybe sort of similar to what Heart of the City has done in 20 years to make Burnsville recognized in the region again. I wonder if Mark, if you want to add anything to how we've approached that area.
Good evening. The only thing I guess I would add, maybe a couple of points. The comprehensive plan is very specific this time around, and I think appropriately so, in still setting high aspirational goals for what that area can become. And I think that's consistent with what Tom just said, that you have a unique resource there that nobody else has. You could say it's rare, but it's almost totally non-existent in most other places of that magnitude, with that location, with potentially those amenities. And so I think the plan does clearly still state that the bar is to be held high by the city. And I think that's all the indications we had with the review panel putting it together. The other thing is, these things are terrifically complicated. I don't know if you can find an acreage of that size that has as many complicating factors as this one does, with the property owners and the issues that are working there. And so it will continue to move, but it will move at its own pace to a certain degree. The beauty of that is, if you're a long tenured EDC member, you'll be back in 10 years, you may be talking about it once again. But more seriously, the comprehensive plan can be amended should it need to be along the way, if something should change more quickly with regard to that. But I think from a land use planning and an economic development context, this plan goes about as far as it can with kind of the policies and the aspirational component of this, saying you really still have something that's great here, patience is going to be required.
Any other questions?
I had a comment.
Yeah.
During the work session, we talked a lot about the Cliff Road Business Park. And I don't know if you're putting like details into this, but I did have another idea on something we could do there. We were talking about how to get the employees of all the different small businesses together. And I thought one idea would be to invite food trucks in there like one day a week to a certain parking lot or certain thing.
Right.
Advertise that to all the businesses, and it would be a gathering spot.
I love it. And it fits into a general context that we talked about, that it has a entrepreneurial culture currently, and that's the kind of thing that we can build on and create relationships between the businesses.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I do like how everything's laid out in here, and it goes into a lot of detail. I didn't think the Cliff Road area was as detailed as some of the things we were talking about. And of course, this is, we don't deal with this all the time. Is there some type of starting point for the Cliff Road project that we should be looking at, or does that make sense? Whether naming it or how to get that rolling, basically.
Yeah, that's an area we spent quite a bit of time talking about, and had a lot of threw a lot of ideas at you and discussed those. I think this reflects where we think a comprehensive long-range plan for a city is in terms of detail, and some of what you're looking for could be in a subsequent effort where we say, okay, what's our work plan in this area for the next 5 years, for the next 2 years? And I can't say for you what the best venue for that would be. Now, having said that, I don't think there'd be anything wrong with us with adding some of those, either some of those thoughts that you may have felt got light treatment here or got left out, or there is an implementation section for that, so I might direct you to look at that implementation section for the Cliff Road Business Park and see if there's some detail you'd want to add there. And you certainly could send us an email after this meeting and we would make those changes.
Great, thank you.
Any other comments? I just had a comment about the statistics as I was going through this. If you're looking at like table 3.1, the percent employment by industry, I kind of find it a little surprising that like the finance, insurance, and real estate and the educational services percentages between Burnsville, the Dakota County, and the state of Minnesota were so low compared to everyone else. Do you know, why that is?
You know what I think that's a function of is that Burnsville has a higher number of jobs in general. You've got an unusual number of jobs for your population. So, the professional services that you're referencing, that probably on a per capita basis, it might be very on par with what it is in other cities or other places. But your manufacturing section, and other sections like that are above, and your retail section are above average. So as a percentage of your total jobs, it looks like a lower percentage than other areas. And the schools, I think, may reflect the fact that there isn't a higher educational institution here, or not a lot of a higher education presence.
Did that section count teachers?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, it seemed really low to me,
Yeah.
too. I noticed
So I
that.
think those are the reasons for it.
Another thing on that chart was that it said that Buck Hill had 500 employees. I found that hard to believe.
Yeah, well, I
Where
didn't
are
verify
they?
that, but that came, I don't remember the information source that came from, but that was a
I would double check that.
specific search of major employers that one of my staff did.
Okay.
But you'd like us to
I think you
verify
should
that.
double check it.
Yeah.
I can't imagine
It
that
does
they
seem like
have.
a lot.
Yes, for seasonal plays.
Yeah.
Tom,
Yeah,
that 500 may not be FTEs.
it may not,
They may be counting each individual part-time person as a employee.
yeah. Other comments?
Well, thank you, Tom and Mark, for all your hard work on this.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to the council legislative agenda. It looks like Jenny will be presenting that.
That's correct. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've put together a brief PowerPoint now. What I've done this year, a little bit differently from last year, was to give you the entire legislative agenda for the council, just for your information, if you're interested about the gamut of topics that the council covers. What I want to talk to you tonight about is the ones that are specifically related to economic development. The council will be meeting at their October work session to consider 2018 legislative priorities and agenda, and they're seeking your input if you have any changes to what's here or any questions. Certainly, we can answer that. And then they'll be meeting with our legislators in January. So with that, this is your opportunity to provide input on that, as I just noted. There are 3 different types of legislative items, I guess I'll call. We have priorities and position statements, and then the last one is monitoring. So when we talk about the priorities, those are items that the council has directed staff to stay actively involved in. We are proactive in this area to seek legislative change. The one in this category related to economic development is closure of freeway landfill. We've talked about that in the comp plan. And the position statement in a general sense, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but gets to supporting the MPCA's efforts to close it in an environmentally sustainable manner, and also that provides for some type of economic development opportunity. We want more than just cap and cover in place. We would like there to be some new buildings put on there. Of course, that meets what our vision is in our 2040 comp plan. So at last year's session, there was some legislation that was passed that helped the MPCA have more tools to get to the end of closure. So that was a good thing, and we were certainly are supportive of that. Looking forward to next year, the city is certainly supporting any state funding that goes towards closure of the landfill. And so that we're talking many millions of dollars here, and this is good to get this closed properly for a number of reasons. So I'll just pause there and see if you have any questions on the landfill closure statement.
Not so much on the statement itself. Where are we with the freeway landfill and that whole thing we got going on there?
Sure. Right now, I guess the status is that the MPCA is continuing to work with the landowner to reach some kind of consensus on a voluntary closure agreement or entering the program voluntarily. The EPA was brought in, I want to say about a year ago or 18 months ago. The MPCA would rather not have it go to the EPA, and for a lot of reasons. So I think there's been an agreement reached there with these new tools that were adopted, that the MPCA actually can carry out the proper closure and not have the EPA do that at this point. So things are continuing to move, albeit at a slow pace, but with these new tools and perhaps some budget funding coming up next session, we'll see where we can get.
Right.
Okay. On the supporting position statements, the items related to economic development, the first one, and these are in no particular priority order on the list, but relates to preservation of host community economic development funding. The city has been receiving, I want to say $400,000, is that correct, Skipper, in the $400,000 range for the last 3 or 4 years under this program. This program is for cities in the metropolitan area that are home to an active sanitary landfill, and we are one of those. So it affects the businesses around the area. It affects what we can do with economic development, with all the trucks going in and out, certainly. So there are some impacts to having a landfill in your community, and these funds are meant to offset that. In 2017, the program was preserved, funding was preserved. That's a good thing for us, so there'll be money for us for the next 2 years to apply for. And there were some minor changes that were made to the grant rules that get to what's allowed for employees and job creation, that kind of thing. So we're now counting construction jobs and a couple other minor changes that will help us administratively. So that's a good thing, and that remains the city's supporting position statement going forward, that we want to preserve those funds. The next one is a very broad category that gets to development and redevelopment, and this covers all the TIF tools that we have in the toolbox. So of course, we support any flexibility that the legislature would give us regarding the use of TIF. We oppose diversion of state or Met Council economic development funds. It's a limited pool of resources that we have in government. Anything we can keep that's dedicated for economic development should be used for that purpose. Certainly, we support innovative programs. There's some innovative tax programs that have been used in the past, income tax credit programs that we'd like to continue to see, if not expand. We support extension of TIF districts that were created during the recession. Of course, many cities adopted TIF districts 2007 to probably 2011. No development came because of that, and so the need to extend that tool longer because development halted in the market is critical. There are timelines that are associated with TIF and when you can generate that increment, and this basically had zero movement in gaining any increase in tax base. The city and other cities in the metro, we were successful in getting our MRQ TIF special legislation extended for a period, I think it was 3 years, and there were also some minor amendments that were added to that. So that's, again, helping us with the tools in our toolbox. So that remains a supporting position statement from the council. If we have any changes in that area, we certainly support having more tools on the table.
It mentions in here, this old shop. What is that program?
Skip, do you have details on that from the committee you're on? Cover that.
This old shop primarily has been coming out of the League of Minnesota Cities. And what they are looking at is, it was a tool that had existed once before. Off the top of my head, I forget how old a building had to be to qualify for some incentives. But one of the pushes, and actually Burnsville led the push, was to make the age of the building less. Off the top of my head, I think, our Commissioner, we've gotten it down to like 30 years old. And the issue was that especially in suburban communities, you don't necessarily have a lot of 50, 60, 70-year-old buildings that need some kind of renovation assistance, whereas in suburbia, at about 30 years, we're probably looking at that. So that's the big change that the league has been trying to get passed through, and that's something that we would obviously support.
Okay.
And in general, I believe it's a tax credit for those buildings that meet the age criteria where improvements have been made, or a tax rebate or a tax credit on the investment that's made.
Okay, thank you.
It's a good question.
I see a lot in here that the city opposes the Met Council from gaining more powers, things of that nature. Is there some sort of instance that is where that is coming from, or?
Commissioner John, I would say generally, Burnsville is not alone in this, but generally cities like local control. Cities are granted certain authorities under the statute, and they want to maintain that local control that they have. The more mandates that are put on cities, especially unfunded mandates, are challenging for local councils to implement without their resources. A lot of the decisions impact neighbors, neighborhoods, and so the more that we can keep locally, the better. The Met Council governance structure, the way it's set up now, that they govern the region, sewer, water, airports, parks, a lot of transportation influences. Those folks, that board, are appointed by the governor. And so the position on that gets to having a Met Council that's appointed by more local official influence instead of coming from the top down, perhaps having it be governed from the bottom up.
Is that a constant struggle that the city would usually be in?
I would say this last two sessions, it's gotten more traction. You may have read stuff in the newspaper about this conflict with some counties. Some of the county boards, the metro counties, are much supportive of a different type of structure. And I think the underlying question is the disconnect of those that are making the decisions versus those that are here locally implementing them. And I think those folks at the local level think things could be done better or more efficiently because people making the decisions would be involved or experiencing what affects them locally, as opposed to carrying some other agenda from wherever they're appointed from and serving the person that appoints them. I believe that's the issue.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you know if there's any serious consideration of advancing something in the legislature that would change their mandate and not to have government or the governor appoint them?
As far as the status of this goes, I believe this is ongoing. I don't think anything's been decided as of yet. There's a subcommittee that has been appointed. The League of Minnesota Cities is involved in this. I think the Association of Metropolitan Counties is involved in this. The Citizens League is involved in this, I believe. So as far as this committee work, and I think the Committee of the Legislative Auditor, I think they may be doing a study of this, but no, as far as I know, there's been no decisions of this, a lot of information gathering, a lot of scenarios being played out, how this could look. So it's a challenging topic, that's for sure.
Oh, it is. Gets a lot of press, too.
It absolutely does, yeah, very political. Any other questions? Okay. Couple other supporting statements that we have. One gets to land use control, and this does get more to the local control. This does get to the comp plan. The city would oppose any restrictions on the city's authority to implement its comp plan through land use. Levy limits, we oppose restrictions on that. Again, the city wants to decide what our taxpayers should be paying to support the local taxing needs. On the transportation side, the city council's position is that we support additional funding for transportation, especially those relating to maintaining current operations with the roads that we have, and supporting the Orange Line funding. Last year, the funding was approved for Orange Line construction, and that is moving along as scheduled. And Dakota County is currently working on Phase 2, which would bring the line from Burnsville down to Lakeville. So that project is proceeding. And certainly, we would continue to support funding for the Orange Line for Burnsville. And then generally on broadband, the city is supportive of broadband legislation. There needs to be more information sharing. That gets to the mapping question, more funding for the Office of Broadband. It's very minimal right now. And eliminating the local barriers to that broadband is considered as an important economic development tool in certain communities, depending on what infrastructure they have or not. But the city's been very supportive of that. And then we move on to our monitoring and tracking position statements. Again, these are the ones just related to economic development, not the entire list I gave you. Regarding state property taxes, the council would oppose additional, it's classes, I misspelled that, sorry about that. Additional classes of properties and increase to taxation levels. And then on the transportation side, certainly having more funds for property maintenance standards. We feel, the council feels economic development, visual appeal is very important when people decide to come to a community or locate in a community, buy a home, move your business here. And a lot of our roads are owned by MnDOT, and it's important that they maintain the roads that they have here. When we have CEOs and workers coming through our community every day, that's important. And then also street improvement district, that should be an option for funding roads. The city's not necessarily supportive of that itself, but they like having tools in the toolbox. So that's where they're at on the transportation funding. And I think that's the last that I have for our legislative positions. And if you have any thoughts or comments, anything related to economic development that you would like the council to consider to add to this agenda for next year, Skip and I will bring that forward to them. And it's fine if you don't have any. The opportunity is here for you to learn and discuss, and if you do have some ideas, the council would like to hear them, if you do.
I just have a comment or question. You'd listed broadband, and I would have thought that would have been an outstate issue as opposed to suburban issue. What's our issue with, are we not getting good enough broadband support?
I think it can be improved. The county right now is working on a countywide initiative for economic development, and I want to use the word SCADA because that's what our system is called, but linking governmental entities' data together through these broadband networks, that's one benefit. And then it is seen as an economic development tool. Scott County had that put in along their industrial park, and that was one of the tools that was touted as attracting Shutterfly and Amazon, is that they had this high-tech infrastructure in place. It's, I think, debatable what the real impact is of it, to your question, but it certainly doesn't hurt to have the broadband in your community. We're competing with companies around the country, around the world, that have this in
I
place.
remember in Chaska rolled theirs out, they made a big deal about it too, so.
Right.
One of the items on here, item number 10, aggregate mining fee. I noticed that on there, and I was just wondering where that came out of. Is there a model for that, or a reason why we're advocating for the establishment of that fee?
Let's see here. I'll just read this so everyone knows what we're talking about here. The city of Burnsville advocates state establishment of a host community fee at a level mutually agreeable to aggregate producers and local governments, consistent with the goal of inducing local governments to foster appropriate utilization of mineral aggregate resources. The fee should be applied to aggregates removed from a commercial source only, as opposed to materials removed from construction project sites, and fees proceeds should be deposited in the city's general fund. I think this is not my area of expertise, Commissioner. So
Okay.
we've got our city engineer's name on there. But
Right, yep.
I believe there's some existing legislation that speaks to this fee, or there has been some legislation introduced in the past which caused this to be on here. There currently is not a fee that we collect that I'm aware of, yeah. But this would be, I think, if it does come up for discussion again, this is what our position would be. And this is on the monitor list, so it is low on the priority list as far as the city goes, and the council may take it off this year, but things seem to come back every 5 or 6 years, so having a position is better than not.
Okay, no, I just didn't know if we had any idea how that would affect our local businesses.
Well, certainly
Here.
we have one big
Right.
business that's in aggregate mining, and if it were to be implemented, our thought would be that it would go, if the city were to get money, this is where it would go to the general fund to help offset the other tax base, so.
And if I could, Mr. Chair, the host community grant that Ms. Faulkner referred to earlier in the legislative agenda, that in effect gives us funds that we are not getting and do not get because we don't have a host fee. And that's why there's only 2 cities that are actually eligible for that grant. We're basically being given money. If you have a large aggregate operation like we do, that obviously removes a fairly large area of Burnsville that could be redeveloped. It also puts in the truck traffic, the heavy truck traffic, so there's a lot of effects from having that. Not to say it's a bad business, there are just effects from having that. That's one of the reasons why, it's probably now 5 years ago, that we got the legislation for the host community grant, is to give us some sort of funding to offset some of that.
Right, but the host community grant applies to the landfill and not the aggregate mining, or am I confused on those?
They're 2 separate things. So the host
Okay.
community grant is a grant program that we apply for.
Okay.
Host fees would be based on some formula based on the amount of rocks hauled out of there. On the landfill, there are host fees that the city gets on the landfill based on the amount of trash brought in too.
Okay, okay.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome, commissioners. You're very welcome.
Well, with that, I believe that concludes this Economic Development Commission meeting. Thank you for your time.
You do need a motion to adjourn.
Oh, yes, that's
Mr.
correct.
Chair.
I will make a motion to adjourn.
Brady, I think
I'll
a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you, Commissioners.